so many of you have decided to, because this is an event that you shouldn't miss. It really is a very exciting talk by Amanda Weinberg, and she is going to talk about her novel, The Tears of Monterini. I'll show it to you. Can you see this? It's beautifully produced. That's the way. It's beautifully produced, and it's the most amazing and exciting book, which is actually based on real events, because there is a village in a hilltop village in Tuscany, and where Jews and peasant farmers cohabit very happily, and this is the setting for Amanda's amazing novel. As I say, it's based on real events, and there is it's called The Tears of Monterini, and it is, in fact, there is tragedy there. I have to warn you, there's tragedy, but there is also hope and redemption, and it's such a vivid, exciting story, and the characters all come to life. I'm so fond of Jacopo and Bella and Angelo and his son Rico, all of these lovely residents of the village of Monterini, and you will really enjoy reading it. At the end, there is redemption, though there is tragedy, and it's so vividly told, and the whole setting is so vividly evoked by Amanda, because one would imagine that it could just be a little bit sort of dry, but somehow she's brought the whole thing to life. It's a most vivid and wonderful story. So without more ado, I'm going to hand you over to Amanda.
Oh, thank you so much, Jill. What a wonderful introduction that was. Thank you very much. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here this evening to talk to Blackheath Halls. Before I start talking about my book and the inspiration, I just want to say it means a lot to be here, particularly because I feel I have a lot of roots in South London and in Blackheath in particular. My father was born in Lewisham Hospital, he lived in Lee. I grew up spending a lot of time with my grandparents who had a sweet shop in Welling, and my favourite great aunt Rose lived in Blackheath, as did a cousin of mine, Susan, and I feel very, very attached to Blackheath. And funnily enough, I did my first teacher's training as well in Kidbrooke School, which is around the corner. So I feel that these are my roots, and I'm delighted to talk to you about my book. I will be sharing my screen in a moment to talk to you about The Tears of Monterini. What I wanted to explain before I did begin my talk was just a little bit about the background, how the inspiration came to me. And if I may, I'd like to take you all back to 1998, when my husband Julian and myself decided we wanted to go to Italy on holiday. And we used to spend all our summers in France, because I'm a French teacher, and we used to take the children to France every year. And we just decided one year, I spoke a bit of Italian, I studied a bit of Italian at university, I did it for O-level as a sub-sid next to my French and German. My Italian wasn't really amazing at that time, but we thought, let's try Italy for a change. And my neighbour at the time was Italian, so I just happened to ask her if she knew anybody who might have a house to rent in Italy. And she came up with a friend of a friend of a friend, as you do, and this person had an apartment in an area called the Maremma, which I'd never heard of at the time, and the village I'd never heard of. So we did a bit of research. We immediately said, yes, let's go. And then we did our research, and all the research said, don't bother to go to southern Tuscany. This is 1998, remember. It's really boring. There's nothing to see. The guidebook said, stay in the north of Tuscany. We looked up online, but online at the time, the internet was very, very basic. In 1998, you had to do this very long-winded thing with CompuServe. It took ages to get any information, and the only information I found out about the area was that there were wild horses. So we knew nothing, but we decided we were going to go anyway. And we started our journey through France and Italy. And I'm going to start to share my screen with you now so I can show you what we did. So this is my lovely talk here at Blackheath Wars about the Tears of Monterini. So we started our journey, and the Maremma is this area here in the red, which is on the west coast of Italy, and it's within Tuscany. And you can see here where the village that we were going to is on the borders of Lazio, Umbria and Tuscany, and it's called Pitigliano. We knew nothing about it, really had no information whatsoever. So when we arrived, we were driving along Country Lane, and we arrived and we just suddenly turned a corner where there was this huge church, Madonna delle Grazie. And we turned the corner and suddenly the most incredible sight popped out. And please bear in mind, first of all, this is a photograph and it doesn't give you really any idea of the beauty of the village. But bear in mind also, we didn't expect anything. And then we saw this incredible sight that popped out of nowhere. And it really is the most awe-inspiring, magical vision. It's based on the town is built on a tufa rock, and it's very golden in color. And we were just awestruck. We stood there. My children were young at the time, I think 6 and 8, and my daughter took my hand and just said, "Mummy, why didn't you tell us?" And I had to say to her, I didn't know. I really didn't know. So this was our first sighting of this very magical place. And we just thought we'd arrived somewhere very special without actually knowing that we were going to find an incredible history, Jewish history, linking the town with the Catholic history that was, for us as Jewish people, really quite overpowering. So I'll just show you a few more photos. So this is another view of the town here. The dome there, the tower, you can see is part of the cathedral. And this is a little road that goes alongside the town, which when I wrote the book, I tried to base Monterini. It is based on Pitigliano completely. It's the setting, you can see the olive trees, the vineyards surrounding the town, the golden tufa rock of the town. So this is very much my setting for my novel. There's another view here, which kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what Pitigliano looks like. Okay, so I wanted to show this photo because it kind of shows you the way the houses are all built one on top of the other, which in my novel, I try to convey this feeling of a town where everything is linked together. It's a small town where all the roads are intricately linked together. In many ways, that when I began to find out a little bit more about the village, I discovered that there was this incredible linking as well of the communities within the village, which my husband and I didn't expect at all. And we arrived, we parked our car, we arrived in the center of the village, there's a big arch, and we just parked the car because we're about to meet the lady whose apartment we were renting. And we saw this sign and we looked at each other and we thought, this is really incredible. First of all, it's a magical, awe-inspiring vision, seeing the town as it was. And then we see a sign that says synagoga, which in a tiny, tiny town, I mean village town, there's 4,000 people that live there now. We didn't expect to see a synagogue in this place in Italy. And we thought, obviously, there was a reason why we were visiting this place. And what happened, we managed to get the keys from the lady and we started to walk through the town. And we crossed the square. This was the main square of the town, which I talk about in my book, with the most beautiful views on both sides of the square. And we walked through, and as we walked through, we saw these little shops, and the shops were selling kosher wine and matzah. It's called in Italian pane asimo. I don't know if you know what matzah is, but I bought a packet just to show you. This is the English version of the matzah. The Italian ones are always round. And we saw these being sold in the town. And again, we thought, where have we arrived? We must have arrived somewhere extremely special. And we had arrived somewhere extremely special. And we realized that this village had a very long and very devoted Jewish presence. They'd been there since the late 16th century. Jews arrived in 1590, well, in the 16th century, the middle of the 1500s. And we discovered this incredible history and how the Catholics and the Jews of the village were so linked. And we fell in love with it straight away. And straight away we began to make friends with people there, with the wonderful woman Eleanor Servey, who runs the museum and the synagogue. And I realized quite quickly that there is a special story here. And quite quickly, I decided I was going to write a novel about this village and about the story and the amazing bonds between the Catholics and the Jews. And so the following year, we came back to the village and we bought a house in the area called the Frata, which is this area here on the left. And this is where my two main characters, Jacopo and Angelo, live in Pitigliano, in Monterini, and they live in the area of the Frata. And I think quite early on, these characters just appeared to me. It was almost like I saw them as a vision. They just appeared, and I saw them sitting on the balcony with their heads, their backs and their heads against the Tufa rock. And I really saw them sitting on their own veranda. And that was the story that really came to me. And I then began to research, and that was the most beautiful part, because I researched the history, the Jewish history, right from when Jews arrived in I think it was about 1555, when there was the first papal bull. There were the papal bulls of 1555 and 1569, where Jews were forced to leave the papal states. And they came to Pitigliano because at the time there was a very wonderful count called Count Orsini, who was an affable man, very happy to receive Jews in his area. And he had a Jewish surgeon called Davide de Pomis, who he was very close to. And because of this man, he was happy to welcome Jews. And they came to Pitigliano because of this, and also because the contadini, which are the peasant farmers of the region, there was no competition with the Jews and the contadini. And so immediately they were able to settle quite happily without having any hostility towards them. And they settled as carpenters, as artisans and bookbinders, and a bit later money lenders. And they settled very happily, and they were there happily until Count Medici arrived, and he didn't like them as much, the Jews. And there was more of an issue when he came to power in Pitigliano. But that didn't stop the bonds between the Catholics and the Jews. And that relationship was cemented very, very early on. I'll just share my next slide. So this is the synagogue in the town that we discovered when we first arrived. And became quite close to the people that work there. I very quickly, when I decided I was going to write this story, it took me years to write it, but when I decided to do some research, I talked to many of the inhabitants of the town, the people that work in the museum and the synagogue, and I got loads and loads of stories going back many, many years. But the era that really fascinated me the most was the fascist era around Mussolini, because what was so interesting was how in this town in particular, at the moment I'm just talking about this town, although I do spread my research further, but at this town in particular, how the Catholics looked after the Jews during the racial era, and then when the Nazis arrived, was something that was really quite amazing to me. And also we both found, my husband and myself, we both found that the way people received us as English Jewish people in the town who'd bought a house there was really quite wonderful. People would come up to us and take my hand and say, so wonderful that you're here. This is our history too. This is our history. And I couldn't really feel, I couldn't say it was my history, because I am an Ashkenazi Jew. My family came from Russia and settled here. So this Italian Jewry is not my history, but I felt very linked and bonded to the town because of this, and was so moved by people's generosity and love of this Italian Jewish culture. I found it really quite remarkable and extremely touching. And so I spoke to lots of people, and I got all their wonderful stories, and my story began to germinate around theirs, and I invented my characters based on people that I spoke to and with the stories that they told me, which I then threaded through the lives of my characters. And so this is the synagogue that has a central part in my story. And you can see here, there are two photos here. You can see the main entrance to the synagogue, and on the right is the inside area. And you can just about see, I hope, the ornate wooden, it's like a barrier for where the women sit at the top, and it's beautifully carved with wood. And I talk about this as well in my book. And I do talk about the synagogue a lot. It's a really beautiful synagogue. This is the second one that was built. This one was built in 1836. The first one was built in 1598, and very little of it remains, but you can see a little bit. It's now in the museum. It's underneath this synagogue. And then they built this as a second synagogue. It completely collapsed in the 60s, unfortunately. And then the Comune of Pitigliano, along with some Jewish organizations in the States and in Canada, managed to get enough money to refurbish it. And it was rebuilt in 1996, when the organization, the association La Piccola Gerusalemme, Little Jerusalem, was founded. And the name Little Jerusalem first became known when Jews arrived in the late 1500s, and they called the town Little Jerusalem, and the synagogue became known as Little Jerusalem. And then the organization that was founded in 1996 was also Little Jerusalem. So, and it is very golden, actually. The town looks very golden and very beautiful. So it's a very apt name for the town. So that's the synagogue. Now, this is my favorite room in the museum. It's called the Matzah Ovens, and these are, as I said before, these are the matzahs. And it's very prescient, this timing of the talk, because matzahs are made for the Jewish festival of Passover. And we actually have our festival of Passover coming up on Saturday. So at the moment, people are preparing for Passover now and getting their matzahs ready. And this is the room that the Jews of Pitigliano used to prepare for their matzahs. And it really is a fantastic room. And you can see there is this long stick there where the matzahs were put onto the bottom part of the stick and taken into the oven to be cooked. And in this picture here, you can see a little bit more clearly the women working on these slabs, these concrete slabs, to make the matzahs. And I think you can just about make out, hopefully, that they are round. The Italian matzahs are very different from the English variety. They are round with lots more holes in them. And you can buy these in Pitigliano, and you can see them making them there. So this was really it still is my favorite room. But the thing that's so amazing about the museum, it is the rooms that were first built when Jews arrived in the 1500s. So you can also see there's a room for the mikvah, which is a special room for ritual cleansing. There is a room for making the kosher wine. There was a room where they did all the dyeing. I mean, it's really quite amazing when you go through this, and it's all built in the Etruscan remains, all underground in the original Etruscan remains, which is very much why I wanted to have the Etruscan feature in my book, because the town is built on so many different levels, and you have this wonderful Etruscan level with a Catholic medieval level on top, and then a Jewish level on top of that. And it is also very, very mixed and intricate, because part of the museum is in this incredible Etruscan site in the Etruscan caves. And that's really quite beautiful as well. Before I speak about Eleanor Survey, I'm just going to show you this. This is also quite prescient because it's coming up to the Seder, which is the meal that you have on Passover. And the Seder was the meal that Christ had for his Last Supper. So this is quite an interesting time to be showing you the slides, because in 2017, we decided we would go to Pitigliano and have a Seder there. The girls who work in the synagogue have been asking us to do this for a long time, but it was never the right moment. And they were very keen for Elena Servi to be part of this Seder. So we made a Seder in the house that the Comune have given to the synagogue for any visiting rabbis. And we made this lovely Seder there. And the interesting thing about the Seder was that apart from my family and Eleanor Servi, the remaining Jew in the town, the other people were individuals who were very involved in the synagogue, and they were very happy.
I can hear her, but I can't see her.
Are you okay there, Jill? So they were very happy to be at the Seder and very pleased to be part of these celebrations. And as they said to me, quite a few of them said to me, again, this feels like it's our history, it's part of our town, our culture, and we feel that we are part of this too. So that was very, very special. I'll just go back. These are two of the girls who work in the museum. In the middle is Claudia and Francesca on her right, and on the left, Roberta, who works with them, but in the shop, which sells the kosher wine and all the Jewish delicacies and the matzah. And I'm going to show you here Eleanor Servi. So Eleanor is the most amazing woman. She's in her 90s. She has given her life to making sure that this culture, this Italian Jewish culture of this village is never forgotten. And she has just received from the President of the Republic of Italy, she's just received a commendatore, which is a very, very high honor for all the work that she has done in preserving the culture of this village, the Italian Jewish culture of this village. And she is really special. And when I spoke to her, I got so much information about her life and the life of the village over the years, and also what it was like during the fascist era and how people lived in the fascist era. And a lot of information she gave me. And my character, Angelo, is loosely based on a person called Fortunato Sono, who was a contadino who was largely responsible for saving Eleanor's family. The Jews were all fine. Even though Italy was a fascist country, they were all really fine, despite the racial laws, despite the Lateran treaties, all these things that happened during Mussolini's rise to power. The Jews were really fine, and in this village, they were fine until the Germans came in 43. They were looked after. Those who lost their jobs were given food by the contadini. They set up their own schools. But it changed in 43 when the Germans retreated from the south, and then they had to hide. And when they hid, they were saved. And Fortunato Sono was a contadino who would go on his donkey every day to find Eleanor Servi's family, and he would take them food. And my character Angelo is very much based on Fortunato Sono. And in Yad Vashem is a Holocaust memorial in the museum and a memorial center in Israel and Jerusalem. And they have an area called The Righteous Amongst the Nations for people who aren't Jewish, but did amazing acts during the war. And Fortunato Sono is mentioned in The Righteous of the Nations. And he was this gentleman who wasn't particularly educated. He was a farmer. He just had a donkey. And yet he has this place for what he did. And these acts of amazing generosity and kindness that I discovered as I did my research was really what informed me when I wrote my book. And I particularly found it so interesting because Italy was a fascist country. It was ruled by a fascist leader. And, you know, we all know what happened in different countries during the war. A lot of us know about the atrocities that happened in Germany and Poland. And that's why it was so interesting that when I did my research in Italy, and I think in the UK and in the States in particular, we don't know so much about these amazing acts that people did of generosity at great, great risk to their own lives in a fascist country. And I was really moved by that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that for a lot of people know about Primo Levi and that he was sent to a concentration camp. The thing with a lot of the intellectual Jews who were really, in a way, quite atheist in their leaning, they weren't particularly religious, they didn't always associate themselves with being very Jewish, but they were very, very politically motivated. And they suffered because of their political beliefs as opposed to their religious beliefs, which was very, very different from the rest of Europe at the time. And in particular, Primo Levi does state in his writings that when you are in Italy, you need to say that you are a Jew, an Hebreo. Soon as you cross the border and you're taken over and you happen to go into Austria for whatever reason, or if you're deported, you then no longer say that you're Jewish. You have to say you're a partigiano, you're a partisan, or you're a communist, because you were safer. And that was, again, very interesting to me to discover how it was a lot harder if you are an anti-fascist, as it was for Primo Levi, Carlo Levi, Leon Ginsberg, who was the husband of Natalia Ginsberg, the writer. And these people suffered, Moravia as well, I think, these people suffered very much because of their political beliefs as opposed to their Jewish beliefs. And that was something that I hadn't understood before I started my research when we arrived in Italy in 1998. So that's Elena. Now, this is something really interesting. These are one of the Jewish delicacies that are very much part of Pitiliano life. And you see them everywhere in Pitiliano. And this is another example of the very close Catholic Jewish bond. Srato means an eviction. Sratare means to evict. The Jews were very safe in Pitiliano until Count Medici came. When he arrived, it was a lot harder for them. He didn't like them very much, and the ghetto was formed in those days. And when he decided he was going to fall out with the Jewish community, he sent his soldiers with their batons, and they'd knock on the door of the Jewish houses and tell them Sratare, it was an eviction back into the ghetto. And these baton-shaped wonderful pastries, they're absolutely delicious. And they are a symbol of this terrible time where it was not easy for Jewish people in Pitiliano. And they are a symbol of that time, but at the same time, they're also a symbol of joy because they are eaten for our New Year, which is our Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and they are made for the Jewish New Year, and they are made with the things that we eat at that time, which is honey and nuts and orange rind and sometimes dates, and this is the symbol of our Jewish New Year, and these srati are eaten or were eaten by the Jews that lived there. And at the same time, the Catholics eat srati and celebrate New Year, Capodanno, with this srati as well. So that's another example of this link. And when people used to come up to me and say, we are like this, the Catholics and the Jews are like this, I saw it in so many different examples, not just in the food, and but also in the way people behaved and the way we were welcomed, and in the stories they told me. And this is the link and the importance of this bond that struck me, as I said before, and why I wanted to write a book showing these amazing acts of generosity and kindness that people did for each other. This is just to show you a little bit about the srati that Lilia made, and you can see some there. You can see they're quite lovely with my book. Marino is another amazing 90-year-old. He's 93, I think, very similar age to Elena. He helped me very much with information on the partisans, and you can see he's an absolutely gorgeous man. He, very interesting, very clever, told me what it was like to be a partisan. He was 16, 17 at the time. And he helped me inform my character, Rico, who becomes a partisan in the book. And I learn quite a lot what it was like for him there and how difficult it was for him to being anti-fascist in Pitiliano, compared initially to somebody like Elena, who had the racial laws against her, but actually managed to live quite easily until 43, of course, when the Germans came. But for him as an anti-fascist, as a partisan, it was a lot harder. And so he gave me a lot of information, a lot of stories, and that was lovely. And so I wanted to include him so people could see how lovely he was and how important he was also for my book. I don't know who's read my book in this talk, and whether you've read it from beginning to end or whether you don't know about it at all, but just for those of you who don't know about it, I talk about Villa Sofia. I call it Villa Sofia in my book, but it really is, the story of the villa is based on the true story of Villa Emma, which occurred in Emilia-Romagna. And I was writing my book. During my research, I belonged to a writing group, and then a friend of mine gave me some information about this incredible story that happened in Emilia-Romagna. So I wrote a short story about it, and I read it out to my writing group, and they all said, no, you have to put this in your novel. So, of course, I then started to expand all the information I was getting and gleaning from my friends in Pitigliano. And then I went outside of Tuscany and I discovered lots of unbelievable stories, including the villa and including also the priest that I mentioned in Assisi, who knew nothing about Jews, but still decided to hide hundreds of them in his crypt. So there were these stories that were thrown at me. As soon as I started talking about it, I discovered amazing, amazing acts of kindness that happened all over Italy. Villa Emma, this was a villa that belonged to a Jewish man who left I think just before, certainly before the Nazis came, but I think before Mussolini came completely to power. And it was used by an organization called Della Sem, which was a Jewish organization that brought children, orphans, from the former Yugoslav Republic mainly, and also from some of them were German, from German homes, some were from Hungarian homes, and some were Roma families and communist families. And the rest of them were from the former Yugoslav Republic. And these children were orphans, and they were brought over by this organization to Italy and hidden and passed off as Catholics. But they were brought over with the Italian government really turning a blind eye. They kind of knew that they were there, but they did nothing about it. They just turned a blind eye to it. And they were brought over and brought up as Catholics. And the whole idea was to teach them the local dialect, which I use in my book, and Bella teaches them the local Monterini dialect so that they can stay safely until they're able to get them out of the country and to Palestine. And what they did was they wanted to teach them skills that would be useful for them once they were able to get to Palestine. And those skills were carpentry and farming. And you can see the villa here, and you can see some of the children from the villa. And the story that I use in my book is exactly the story that happened. And I won't talk too much about it, but the events that occurred were really what happened in real life, and why they had to suddenly leave the villa in real life, and how they escaped. And so this was included in my Tales of Monterini, which is why I didn't call it Pitigliano, because I included so many other stories and information that I had gleaned on my journey. So this is a final photograph of Pitigliano, so you can have a little bit of a bird's eye view of the town, and just about see the mountains in the background and the foliage around the town. So during this pandemic, unfortunately, I have been unable to get to Italy at all. I haven't been there for a year and a half, which breaks my heart. But my son very cleverly found a tiny little gap in September where he was able to go to Pitigliano, and he took copies of my book to my friends there and the people that helped inspire me. And although they don't speak English, we gave them an English copy, and there is a picture of it in our street, in the Fratta, just by our house, which is really nice. And you can probably see that the way the streets and the houses are all kind of tumbled down on top of each other, which is exactly how I describe them in the book. And so I wanted to say thank you, grazie, to Blackheath Halls for inviting me to talk about my book, and I'd be really delighted to answer any questions.
I want to thank you very much indeed for that wonderful talk. It really was inspiring and so illuminating. There was so much background information there, wasn't there, Amanda?
Well,
It was,
I hope so. I would just,
yes, it
Emily,
just filled in all the gaps.
I
And
hope I didn't talk for too long. I was only intending to talk for half an hour, but I seem to have gone on for a bit longer, so sorry.
it was so illuminating and so interesting, particularly at this time, I feel. I don't need to be heavy-handed about that, but I'm sure you know what I mean. So now I would like to just ask you a question to start the questions going. And I was very interested in Tanaquila.
Right.
And I told one of my friends who's been reading the book that she was a Jewish presence, and Jay, her name was, said to me, no, Jill, she was Etruscan, but I pointed out that only the Jews, in other words, Bella and her father, they were the only ones who could see her. So that's why I concluded that she was Jewish. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about Tanaquila.
Right. So Tanaquila is definitely an Etruscan presence. The reason, I think I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, the reason I really wanted to have an Etruscan presence in the book was because the town is built on Etruscan ruins, and the Etruscans, we know very little about them. They were wiped out by the Romans, and people think, historians think that a lot of these amazing inventions of the Romans were in fact Etruscan, and that the Romans took them for themselves. Well, we don't know. There's no proof, but there's very little that we know about them. They're really quite a secret and unknown society, but they were a very powerful society. And Pitiliano is built on these amazing Etruscan caves, and you've got the Tufo mound and these incredible caves and amazing pathways that were built in between all the villages. It's really quite fascinating. And this was very important to this area. And it's a civilization that was completely eradicated. And I felt very much that I wanted to include that civilization because it felt like it was part of the area. And, you know, there were these levels. You've got the Etruscan, as I said before, then the Catholic, and then the Jewish. And then we never know, you know, in 200, 300, 400 years' time, what happens to us all? Are we all wiped out? So, and I just thought I wanted to keep this civilization to show that it existed and show the importance of its existence, and that it wouldn't be forgotten, really. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason is that, as I mentioned, Pitiliano is extremely magical. It's a really magical place. And how do you show magic in the book? You can't say something's magical. You have to show that there's magic. So I used the technique of magical realism, which is where this figure arrives. So that was another reason I was able to use her as magical realism. And she's also this spiritual presence, which was able to kind of communicate itself to Bella, and to some extent to Jacopo, although he denied it. So she was there for those purposes. But it's interesting you bring her up, because I've had a lot of people have read the book, and I've had lots and lots of comments from people. And some people absolutely love Tanaquila and feel it's so important to the book and really get it. And other people don't. So I think it's a very personal thing, whether or not you like this presence or not. But I really wanted to introduce it because I wanted to have a way of showing how important the Etruscan civilization was to that area. Yes,
it was very much part of the whole ambiance, I thought, of the book, and it was just totally appropriate as far as I was concerned. Now, are there any other questions? Are there any other people who would like to ask a question now? We'll go back to, can you hear me?
Yes, so we have a question from Irina, who says, thank you, Amanda. You gave me the goosebumps. Is this book translated into Italian, or will it be? Will you read a few passages for us?
Well, I would love it to be translated into Italian. I think it really is down to the publishers to try and get translation rights, but I would love it to be translated into Italian. I hope one day it is. At the moment it isn't. I don't know, do you want me to read a passage, or?
I think that would be a lovely idea. Yes, it'd be wonderful.
passage, but there is a lovely passage, actually, if I can find one, which really shows it shows the bond between the Catholics and the Jews. I could read this one. I've just found it, actually. This is a part of the book where the racial laws have just been announced and everyone has to leave their jobs if they're employed by the state. My character Jacobo has his own bookshop, so he can keep that. That's not a problem. But his second wife, Leah, she's a teacher and she has to leave the school, and his daughter Bella has to leave the school, and the doctors have to leave. So this is the part that's showing a procession where they have to leave and how the Catholics kind of join the procession and become part of it with the Jews, and that there is this amazingly strong coexistence between them. So shall I just read a little bit?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Jacobo sat by the window of Roberto's bar. He was holding a copy of Benedetto Croce's literary magazine. La Critica was aimed at anti-fascist Italian intellectuals, and Jacobo was taking a risk, one he refused to take when Bella showed him a copy of Fontanara. But it was Jacobo's way of saying thank you. Like Jacobo, Croce had questioned Mussolini for years. He'd been one of the few Italian intellectuals who refused to sign Mussolini's questionnaire on racial background and was now under house arrest. There was a thumping sound, like the stamping of footsteps. Jacobo looked up. He took a deep breath, wondering whether it was another fascist march. Thump, thump, clunk, clunk. The noise grew louder. Jacobo folded La Critica and placed it inside his jacket. Then he noticed the wave of human bodies turn the corner and come into view. Some children, contadini in dungarees and cloth caps, the bank manager, the lawyer, villagers from every corner of Monterini. At the front of the crowd was Bella, eyes shining, face like a wax candle. The whole village has come out. Maybe they're protesting, Roberto gestured to Jacobo from the counter, where he was pouring espressos laced with grappa into small white cups. Jacobo rose. He'd felt confused at first, unsure what was happening. Now he understood. This is no protest. This is solidarity, he said. This was the town he'd lived in his entire life, home to generations of Levis. He felt strangely bereft, yet grateful at the same time. I love you, Monterini, he whispered as he stepped onto the street. The sun sliced through clouds, an orange stain in a dark sky. A hand brushed Jacobo's shoulder. It was Angelo, wearing blue overalls, face smeared with purple marks and fine earth. His smile was guarded as he placed his arms around Jacobo and hugged him. Jacobo was struck by the scent of wine that seeped from Angelo's clothes, from his hair, his skin, his vino degli angeli, wine of the angels. Angelo pointed towards a group of men wearing the grey suits and flat caps of the fascist police. Look, there's Ugo Grazzi. We used to play with him, Jacobo, remember when we were lads? Jacobo looked across at his old friend, now living in Grosseto and head of the Salone police force. Their eyes met. Grazzi nodded, then lowered his gaze. He was larger than Jacobo remembered, with a portly belly and wide, strong shoulders. Jacobo could just make out a thick moustache over his upper lip. He wondered how Grazzi felt seeing the villagers come out in sympathy for the Jews who'd lost their jobs, their right to an education. Then he wondered why Grazzi was back here in Monterini on this, of all days. Was it to check the new rulings were carried out? He dismissed the thought and turned his head towards Angelo. The police can't join in, no matter how liberal their views may be, but at least they were here. This was more than solidarity, Jacobo realised. This was a village in mourning. It reminded him of a funeral cortege with its silence, its unproclaimed grief. Monterini was saddened by the absence of liberty, morality. Oh yes, even morality was missing from Italy now, and when that goes. Jacobo threaded his way through the crowd to Bella. Cheeks milky pale, eyelids heavy, she turned her face towards him. Her irises gleamed with an intensity Jacobo had not seen before, green sparks like jewels glinting in sunlight. He wondered how, on such a dark day in the history of the village, she could look so beautiful, so deeply happy.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I hope it
Thank you
doesn't give
so
too
much.
much away, but it gives an idea of the bond, the Catholic-Jewish bond, and how important that was. And in the real Pitiliano, that coexistence was there right from the very beginning, from the late 1500s.
It's really incredible, isn't it? And very moving to know that this was the case, because it's something I didn't know about at all. I had no idea. So it's, you know, really uplifting for me personally.
It's fascinating. So we have a few more questions. Annie asks, where can I buy a copy?
Well, everything's shut. You have to buy it online. I mean, you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it from Waterstones online, or if you don't like Amazon, a lot of people don't, you can buy it from Blackwell's, any of the online stores really. Waterstones is a good bet. Blackwell's a lot of people have bought from, or maybe even your local bookshops might get them for you online as well. And if anybody has read it and likes it, I'd be so grateful if you'd put a review on either Waterstones or Amazon, because in this pandemic and bookshops are shut, it's the only way for authors to get feedback from reviews. So that would be wonderful if you could.
Yeah. I think it's very well produced, actually. It really is. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You know, it's so nice to read. It's lovely, clear print, and you know, I find it a real pleasure to hold, and I love the front cover too. It's awfully good, isn't it?
And that's a picture of the village of Pitiliano. Yes.
So Rosemary asks, what is the size of the Jewish population now?
In Pitiliano?
Yes.
There's 3 people. There is Elena Servi, who I showed you just before, her son and her nephew. Yeah, and her son and nephew are less involved, actually. It's really down to her. And as I said, she is in her 90s. So it is quite worrying about the future of the Jewish history. But I think because it means so much to the people of the village and to the comune, I know that it will continue, and we are there as well. So we will really ensure that the culture does continue. And it's very famous, become a lot more famous now than when we first went in 1998. A lot more people have heard of it. I think they said to me, the girls said that work in the museum said that in 2017 they had 30,000 visitors over the summer, which is absolutely incredible. There were more visitors there, they said, than in the other things in Tuscany around. They were very excited to have so many visitors. So that's quite unusual, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Amazing. My goodness.
We have another question from Deb. She says, Amanda, thank you for the insights into the writing of your wonderful book. Is there anyone you met or heard about that inspired the character of Jacobo?
No, Jacobo was completely invented, really, by me. No, because the only Jews there, really, the only Jewish person there was Eleanor Servi. So I really invented Jacobo. But I think Jacobo was probably, when I did my research around, I discovered a lot of things that people actually went through. So, for example, with Bella in particular, Jacobo's daughter, she converted. I hope this isn't giving too much away, but she had to convert when the Nazis came. And this is something that happened to so many people. So many people converted and had to change their religions to stay safe. And these were stories that I heard about all the time. So I kind of threaded these things around my character. So little things that I heard about Jacobo, like setting up the school, were things that I heard from individuals that told me in other parts of Italy that this is what they did. So what happened to him happened to other people, and the way he was hidden the way Eleanor Servi's family were hidden. And one of our friends from Pitiliano always told me right at the beginning that his uncle, who was a doctor, would go on his trips for hunting and fishing, but not take a fishing rod or a rifle, and would go and take food. And they would be taking food to Eleanor Servi's family and to the other families in the village. And another story that somebody told me was that which I didn't actually include in the book, which is a shame, that his father used to go on a brown donkey, and he would say, if I go with the brown donkey, don't come out, it's too dangerous. But if I go with the white donkey, then it's fine, you can come out. So there were all these amazing stories that I heard that people talked about. And one thing I didn't talk about, actually, which is quite important, is that in the area to the north, it was very difficult for Jews. It was quite different from Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna and the other areas around. In the north, in the area called the Alto Adige, which is where the Bosen were. This is the area it's the frontier with Austria. And until the First World War, this area was part of Austria. And even until today, a lot of the Italians living there, they have Italian passports, but they do identify a lot with their Austrian heritage. They speak Italian and they have Italian passports, but they read German newspapers. German is probably their first language. And they very much identified with this Teutonic background during this fascist era. And so the Bosen were a group that I discovered when I did some research on Erich Priebke, who I mention in my book, who was a Nazi, who was a commander in the police force called SIPO in Rome. And I discovered a lot about him, and then I decided I have to go further afield. Not everybody survives in Italy, and there are some terrible things that happen when the Nazis arrived. So I then included some of the stories that I researched with Erich Priebke and Kappler, his commander, and this Bosen. And there was a terrible attack called, I didn't know about it beforehand. Obviously, if anybody's Italian here, they will have heard of it. It was called the Forseyadiatine, and it was a really dreadful murder, really, in these caves outside of Rome. And it happened in March of 43, and the order was given by Erich Priebke. And they murdered 335 Italians that they just took off the street and killed. And 75 of them were Jewish. And this was a terrible massacre, really dreadful. And I, strangely enough, had never heard about it. We hear so much about things that happened in other countries. Never heard about this until I did my research. And the reason that they did this, and this is a very important aspect that I write about in my book, was that just before, a few days before, the partigiani, the partisans, had planted a bomb in a street in Rome called Via Rasella. And they had killed 32 of the Bosen who come from the north, who are very much on the sides of the fascists, on the sides of the Germans. And they killed them. And the Nazis, the Germans, had this idea that if one of their men is killed, you have to kill 10 Italians. And they would take anyone. And that's what he did. He just took individuals that he found in the street, bakers, postmen, people walking to their back, and he took them to these caves and he killed them. And it was really dreadful. So I decided to include this in my book because I discovered about it in 2013 when I was still writing my book. It took me years to write. I was still writing my book in 2013, and I discovered that he had died. He was 101 at the time, and he was living in house arrest in Italy, and he died. And they wanted to take him back to Germany and to have, in a way, a bit of a hero's kind of funeral. And the Italians didn't want him to go back. And this was all over the news. I don't know if some people have heard about it or remember it. It was all over the news. And I thought, I have to include this in my book because it's really, really important. And so I did some research, and Erich Priebke managed to escape at the end of the war to Argentina. And he lived there until the 70s. And he thought that he was fine and he got away from it all. He was very blasé. And he was interviewed by an Argentinian journalist in which he told them about what he did during the war. And this journalist took it to the Italians, and he was extradited and kept under house arrest until he died at 101 in 2013. And this death and where he was going to be buried became a huge thing in Rome. So I decided, of course, my research had gone outside of Pitigliano, outside of Tuscany, and I decided it had to be included. So I talk about these other atrocities that happened. So my story is very much more authentic in a way, because it's not just about the beautiful, kind acts that people have done, although that's what I wanted to set really concentrate on initially, but it became a more authentic account of what happened all over Italy. But I think from what people say, what you're left with is generosity of the human spirit, and that people do these amazing things for others at great risk of their own life. And that was really what I wanted the reader to be left with, that although I introduced these other things that really did happen in real life, I wanted people to know that really what came out of it for me was that people had done incredible things for others. The villa, the individuals that saved these people's lives, and stories that I heard all over. And that was really what I wanted to impart in my book. And I hope that comes across.
It most certainly does. It's absolutely vital and very uplifting, I found.
Good. I think there's another question, is there?
Yes, there's one more question. Someone whose name I don't know, it's anonymous. Are you writing another book? And if so, what is it about?
Well, I'm writing, funnily enough, 2 books. One is with another friend. We've been writing it for a long time. It's also an Italian book. It's set in Italy, not the war period, the 60s and the 80s. And it's very different. It's much more commercial and much easier and not historical. But my book on my own is another historical book, actually based on my grandparents in a way, just based on an event that happened to my grandmother who lived in Odessa in Russia. And in fact, my grandparents came from Odessa to Woolwich and settled in Woolwich, and was actually, my grandfather was one of the key founders of the Woolwich synagogue. And so I'm writing a story about the Odessa pogrom, and it's also set in Odessa and also later in London in the 2000s. So that's a historical novel based on history, but also a lot of invention as well.
Sounds very interesting.
So, are there any more questions? You could raise your hand or type the question into the Q&A or into the chat. So I'll just give a second for the audience to do that if they have any. Okay, so someone's raised their hand. Let me see. Oh, I think they may have put their hand down again. Sorry, whoever raised their hand, did you want to ask a question? Just press the button again. Okay, so perhaps they've changed their mind. Maybe their question was already answered. So I think we can leave it there. Thank you so much. Oh, no, Joan is asking a question, sorry. I'm allowing you to talk now, Joan.
First of all, thank you, Amanda, very, very much indeed. It's been absolutely riveting. I have a house in northern Tuscany, and I've never, ever been to Pitigliano, but I'm definitely going to join the 30,000 when it's possible to do so. I just wondered, you said it took you years to write. Just how many years? Had you actually tried writing a novel prior to that? If you had tried, did you ever try to get anything published? I'm really interested in how long you've been endeavouring to get to this point.
Well, it is a long story and it took a long time, and I've always wanted to write. Writing was very much part of who I am, and I've always written, short stories and little things. But at the time in 1998, when we went to Pitigliano, I was working full time. I had my own company, traveling around the world. I had young children, and I wasn't in a position to be able to write at all. And I really knew, more or less as soon as I arrived, that this was going to be what I was going to write about. But I couldn't do it straight away. So I started researching, blah, 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 as I said before. But I couldn't actually start doing it while I was in this full-time job, which I had to travel to parts of Europe. and look after my children and all the different things that, you know, you juggle when you have young kids and a full-time job. So it wasn't until I was able to leave work, we actually sold our business, my business partner, myself, and then I went back to teaching, tutoring at home, French and German, which then enabled me, gave me the time to do some writing. But the book took me probably the best part of 15 years to get published, not necessarily to write, but actually to get published. It probably took 10 years of writing and revising and researching. And then it took me a while to get an agent and then a while to get a publisher, but now it's out. And so it has paid off. And one thing I haven't said, that really for me, the book is a love letter to Pitiliano. That's really why I wrote it. And so that's why I'm so pleased finally it is out there, because it is a love letter to the village that I fell in love with. I hope that answers the question, Joan.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, dear Amanda. I assure you that it's this great love and genuine, long-term, profound feeling for Pitiliano that comes over in your book. It really is a wonderful book and a great inspiration. But I think what is so astonishing is that it's all based on true events. Mm. And it's your first book, but it's so accomplished and so vivid. I really am impressed, and I'm sure the rest of us are as well. So thank you very much indeed for this lovely occasion. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate that, and being here and being able to talk about it, and especially in Blackheath, which means so much to me. So thank you very much, Jill and Joan and Emily as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and good night, everyone.
Okay, good night.